I suspect that as we think about songs that are meaningful for us, that oftentimes those songs have a deep connection with other people as well. And so friends may not have done it for you, but I invite you to go through that Rolodex in the mind at some time and just kind of give a sense of welcome back into them, and perhaps you'll wonder, like, well, I wonder what they're up to these days. Friendships are so valuable. In a sense, that's what we've been looking at over these past several weeks, this journey that we've been taking together. We've been looking at this wonderful connection that we call relationships and friendships. And so I kind of did put these in an order that I thought made sense. We started with empathy. And again, the overall theme is connecting in a time when we're disconnected. And mind you, I'm not one that thinks a long ways ahead into my sermons. But certainly I never could have imagined, that when I thought this up even 6 weeks ago, the level, the degree to which we feel fractured, here in the good old U.S. of A. These days. And so the first week we talked about empathy, and that how important it is for me to be able to put myself into the other person's shoes, and to think about, where, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, to the degree that we can. And that involves a certain level of trust, in that relationship, because there's give and take there. And so that was our second week. And then last week, we acknowledged that, hey, sometimes we go off the rails, and so we need forgiveness. But all of those, you put those into the stew, and we hope that what we come out with is friendship. And then next week, we're going to look at encouragement. And partly I chose encouragement for next week because Jesus, during Holy Week, needed encouragement. And so I thought that would be a good one for us to look at next week. And encouragement is something, that's one of the spiritual gifts. I don't know if you knew that. That's one of the spiritual gifts. And so some people are gifted with that, and others of us maybe have to work at it. But that's not to say that, I don't need to worry about encouraging somebody else because, that's Sarah's job, because she's got the gift of encouragement. That's really something for all of us, but we'll look some more into that next week. But we throw all of this together into the mix. And you and I, we know people who have lived out all of these dynamics, and because of that, they have come into deep and abiding, long-lasting, lifelong friendships. Now, a lot of times when we think of the word relationship, and it's tossed out there for discussion, I think a lot of us think, you're talking about dating, you're talking about marriage, or you're talking about parenting. But here we've simply been talking about how do you make good friends, how to be a friend, how to cultivate a culture of friendship. And I think that perhaps we've all experienced, but we're all certainly aware of the fact that we can be around a lot of people and still be very much alone. In fact, one of the loneliest places we can be is when we find ourselves in a room full of people and feel totally disconnected from them all. So I think the word friend it's evolving, it's changing, it's like the butterfly, it's metamorphizing, but it's certainly changed, because one can go online now and look at someone's Facebook account and say, wow, they have 300 friends. My gosh, I am such a loser. I hardly have any friends on Facebook. But if you have 300 friends, how many of them are really friends? I knew someone who they would just tell a lot of people, hey, you're my best friend, you're my BFF. That's the language they use. But then I began to wonder, when I heard that they kind of passed that around so much, I wondered if they really did have what they would call a best friend. And the flip side of that problem, if you will, is that over the years, I've known a few people who gave themselves so much to others that they became emotionally drained. They became emotionally overwhelmed and ended up not being able to sustain themselves in those friendships and ended up retreating into themselves, but not in a healthy way that Gina described for us, but just retreating into themselves. Well, I had to get really close, but I saw a bumper sticker that said, when you're walking alone, at least you know you're walking with someone you can trust. I about had to introduce myself to that car. But the other way of looking at that is if you're walking alone, it also means you don't have anyone on the journey with you. You don't have anyone that you can trust. Now, we don't look at the book of Proverbs very often, perhaps not nearly enough, but there's so much good insight into the life that's there. And in Proverbs 18:24, it says, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. Now, that's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? And so it's saying if you want to know your future, it says take a look at your friends. Now, one who has unreliable friends is soon headed for trouble. Now, perhaps in your experience and in my experience, I'm like, well, that's not always true, but certainly David, who we think wrote a good portion of the Proverbs, was onto something there. And as I've said, our sacred texts give us a lot of insight into relating to God, and I think that's why we typically come to our scriptures. But they're also concerned, as we see in this scripture, they're also concerned with helping us understand how to relate to one another. God cares about our friendships, okay? And perhaps that's not foremost or even remotely in our thinking very regularly. We may have thought that it was only our moms and our dads who were concerned who we hung around with. Anybody have the conversation by the parents that said, I'm not sure you should be hanging around with him. And how many of us as parents then, yours aren't old enough yet, Ashley, but at one point you might be, we say to our kids, and boy, if I learned some things later on about my kids, like, oh, I thought Johnny was a good kid. Sometimes, they can fool the best of us sometimes, But our good book says the one who has unreliable friends is headed towards trouble. And I don't think I've mentioned it nearly enough, but when I think of the traits that we've covered, whether it's empathy or trust or forgiveness, I have a long way to go in all of those traits and all those connections. And when I look around and see someone who's able to have developed lifelong friends, I know jealousy isn't the right word because, my limitations, we move, and so we're, that's one of the, and then plus we have as a prime directive as clergy that we're not to have friends. I don't know how many of you know that historically that clergy used to move every 2 years. And that's when society was pretty stable. But clergy moved every 2 years, and it was because they didn't want us to start having friends. Because when you have friends, then you start to play favorites. When you play favorites, then you're not doing, so that was one of the directives that we as clergy, kind of like are told, and not just implied, but are told. So for those people who have friends, I'm not jealous, I'm just really happy for them. Because in our mobile society, some of us need what we might be called seasonal friends. I'm here but for a little while, but I'm going to make the most of the time while I'm here. Now, I'm not just speaking for me, but those who end up moving and transitioning throughout life. Now, here today, when I look out, I know, fortunately, I think almost all of you have been blessed to pretty well have your roots, in this community. Not much of an issue here, but I can tell you that the church I served at in Hinsdale, that was a huge issue. That was a very upwardly mobile community. A lot of executives tend to get moved around. And so developing, connections within the church was a challenge there, as well as really it's a challenge everywhere. But they faced a unique challenge in that it was not unusual to have someone come in. It's also a time when church was kind of in vogue. They'd come in, but they would only be there for a couple of years. And so we faced some issues of trying to help people find friends within that community. And as I said, if you want to serve as my confessional this morning, as I said, as clergy, we face kind of an uphill struggle because we're told specifically not to develop friendships within our setting. We're told, well, you can have friends outside the church, but they never really tell us how is it that we're supposed to find time to meet those people or where we're supposed to meet those people. And then one of the standard rules, again, is we're not even supposed to come back, set foot in the church for a year after we've left. And then another kind of unspoken rule, but understood, is that if a pastor wants to come back and be a part of a congregation, they're supposed to wait 5 years before they can do that. I got in big trouble one time. Again, hard to imagine. But someone that I wasn't even that close to, but he was a pillar of the church at Antioch, and it was about month 9 or 10 that this person passed away, and I went. I didn't speak. I didn't do anything. I just sat in the congregation. Didn't even stay much afterwards to bits with everybody. And I don't know, it was 5, 7, 10 days after that, I get a call from the district superintendent saying, I heard you went to a funeral at Antioch. I'm like, yeah, I did. So they clarified the rule for me. Like, I didn't know. No, I don't know what I said. I think I basically said, I don't want to repeat what I think I said. But that's kind of some of the challenge that we have as clergy. So here what I'm saying is I'm a Monday morning quarterback talking about friendship. You know, something that many of you could probably talk about far better than I. But I suspect that many of us have lived and observed life that have understood or seen that there are certain characteristics, there are certain attributes that we see in people who have wonderful, deep, meaningful friendships. And I've mentioned some of those: empathy, trust, forgiveness. But I want to add one today that's kind of outside that box, and that is that those kind of relationships often involve the level of speaking truth to one another. In Ephesians 4, it says, speaking the truth in love. Another characteristic, again, we see from the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs describes it this way. I think really that these are two are the same. Speaking the truth of love in love, and as iron, this is the way the Proverbs puts it, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. I don't know if you've ever been around iron sharpening iron, but it takes heat, it takes pressure, heat, pressure, and it takes fire. And so one of the times when I was riding a motorcycle through Vietnam, I had a wonderful guide. One time we just pulled off the road. I had no idea why we pulled off the road. We walked through this field, and they were making chopsticks just in the middle of this field. They had a tent, and they had this machine, and they were and it's the sort of thing that's why I often get a guide, because I wouldn't have known that they were making chopsticks in that field, you know. But another time we pulled off the road, we went in, and they actually were forging steel there, and they were using steel then, you know, to make these sharpened tools. And sparks and heat were everywhere. And so what's the author of the Proverbs getting where he talks about iron sharpens iron? Because see, when I think about affecting another person in a relationship, I'm in favor of a different image. I'm more in favor of the image at the beginning of the movie Ghost, you know, where they got those hands and they've got the clay, and you know, it's like, oh, that's the kind of isn't that the kind of relationship you want? Oh yeah, especially Demi Moore, yeah. So you know, they got that clay thing going, but the author here says that we, and I don't think that's to the exclusion of that, but the author here says that sometimes the type of shaping that needs to take place, the change that needs to take place in our life, it's not going to be just characterized by soft clay. It's going to be more characterized like the iron being forged by fire. As such, one person sharpens another. And so if you're going to have people in your life who can really help you move forward in your life, we will need people with whom some sparks might fly. After all is said and done, it's about deep friendships. that we'll only know if someone is truly a friend after we've had a skirmish or two, or after some sparks have flown. I think I've mentioned before, when I was doing, marriages and premarital, conversations, there'd be times where it's usually the guy who would say, we'd talk about how things are going and say, "Oh, Pastor, we've never had a fight." I thought, well, then you're really in big trouble. Because what's going to happen the first time you do? In the dating, and that oftentimes, that sharpening continues on as the relationship grows and matures. Only after we've spoken truth into another person's life, or they've spoken it into ours, truth that's not easy to hear. Now, mind you, I'm not talking about some kind of truth that just drops like a bomb, and that kind of person who can tell really isn't interested, who isn't invested in you. Again, I've told the story of a couple who, I think they kind of prided themselves. They would come up to me and say, "Pastor, we've got a word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is spoken to us." And at that point, I was like, "Uh-oh." I mean, yeah, they saw it as truth. I saw it as just that, they were going to say something mean, painful, something that wasn't good. And that's not the kind of spark that the author is talking to us. In hindsight, I was left to wonder if they were just trying to pump up their own sense of self. What I'm talking about here is conversations where we are invested in the person with whom we're having the conversation with. This is about taking a relationship deeper and being honest enough to tell the truth, and understanding that the person whose life you are invested in is worth sharing your thoughts with. So another way of looking at this is and bear with me, if you're not willing to tell the truth to someone, could it possibly mean or possibly be interpreted as you don't believe that they want to change or that they are open to change? That you actually see them in something less than their best light. See, when we're in a deep, meaningful relationship, that you believe, you hope, you expect that person wants to grow, and you refuse to think less than that of them. Now, the flip side of this, or the danger, is that a person wielding the power, would we say, in a relationship, or in the relationship, or in the position, will sometimes surround themselves with people. That's all they want, is they just want people to affirm them and say, yes, you're wonderful, yes. You tell them how awesome you are. And for me, then the story, another kid's story comes to mind, is the king who had no clothes on. It can and happens everywhere, where positions of power then look only for affirmation. Could be the principal at the school. It happens all regularly in clergy situations, in pastoral churches, in churches. We see that in the halls of elected office. And certainly it's most easily embraced when one has absolute power, whether it be the President of the United States or the President of South Korea. The third President of South Korea now just got arrested and detained. And so absolute power, as we've heard, corrupts absolutely. So the temptation is to think that those who are around you, that they'll come to understand that their job is to tell you only what you want to hear. And that's not what friendships are for, dear friends. See, wisdom, and that's what the book of Proverbs is a book about. Wisdom takes a different approach. So whether we're in governmental leadership or simply navigating the friendships around us, while it might be easier and more comfortable to share and to avoid some conversations, our life is never best served by surrounding ourselves with people who just want to kiss up or suck up, as they say sometimes, and tell us only what we want to hear. It is a delicate trail to traverse. And can I say one that the church communities are often not very adept at? I can think, and many of you I'm sure can as well, think of instances where people in the church, both in positions within the church and those without a position in the church, have just used and manipulated relationships. They've, we might call it like bullying, but no one knew how to handle them, right? Because as a church, we're supposed to be nice, even if someone else is not. And sadly, many churches stumbled in that area, has lost good people because they didn't want to be around toxic people. Think about how different that is from what Proverbs 27:9 says, the heartfelt counsel of a friend is as sweet as perfume and incense. The heartfelt counsel. And so as we're trying to navigate the relationships in our lives, one way to look at them would be to ask, well, is what's being said, is it being experienced as sweet perfume and as incense? I thought of that just a couple of weeks ago when our lesson contained the words from Ephesians 4, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only that which is helpful for the upbuilding of one another. I thought, oh, that's a great passage. Just think how much that contributes to deep and meaningful friendships and relationships. I don't know what your experience has been, but mine has been that deep friendships have often been forged out of moments of struggle and failure. Not success, and certainly not just success. We had a small group in Wheaton, again being a rule breaker, I guess, but we had a small group. It came out of a book study that we were doing, The Purpose-Driven Life. That was a very popular book, and that group just continued. We had our 6 weeks or 7 weeks or however long it was, but then we just continued, and it was as two marriages within that group ended up breaking up, and it was as one of the kids, one of their not their children necessarily, but a child in that group, parents who came to the group, hard way to explain it, ended up having some trouble with the law. And it was that type of vulnerability, the type of stuff that doesn't get shared in just a very casual setting, that really grew that group close together, and we still communicate with them some 15 years later. It's those kind of friendships that are forged when the sparks have been flying around. So who will be there for you when your life takes a left turn? Who will be there for you when life feels like it's crumbling? I like Proverbs 27:10 that was read for us, and it says, never abandon a friend. If you're a friend, you don't walk away. You lean in the difficult times. See, I also think it relates to us, to our faith community. It's easy to come to church to get, right? It's easy to come to church as long as church makes us happy or makes us feel good or provides something that we want or we need. But in the lexicon of life, a part of that time is I'm not looking for ways to give. I'm looking for a way to receive. So, but we can look that way, right? In terms of beginning to cultivate relationships within here. Someone can wake up in the morning, and as they think about going to church, whatever church they go to, whatever fellowship they're part of, they wake up and they say, well, I wonder who I can strike up a meaningful conversation with today. And if someone comes up with an attitude that every sermon, if someone does that, then you don't come wondering if every sermon needs to be what might be called on point. Every song that is sung doesn't need to be just perfect as well. So for some, it's not so much about being a part of a community as much as it's more about me. Now that's a good place, an understandable place for us to start, but hopefully we grow from that. We grow and we begin to have an understanding of giving rather than only receiving. One time when I was going through a particularly difficult time at a church, the people that really related to me and reached out to me and were there for me and most sensitive to me were those from the mental health community. In what many of us are experiencing as difficult times, I believe now more than ever, I really do, that the church is the hope of the future. And the future of the church, friends, the future of the church and her strength will not be found in doctrinal purity, but will be found in the strength of her relationships and the strength of her friendships. And my, how I hope it's so for every one of you and for all of us. Amen.